Welcome to the Daily Gospel of John. A beautiful day in Upper Falls, Maryland. We're moving a little further in chapter 6, looking at verses 16 through 19. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. Well, they probably had good reason to be terrified. These guys were worn out, tired. Their day had begun. Remember, they had come back from preaching and healing in different towns, had hiked back to meet with Jesus, and the crowds were gathering around, wanting to be healed, wanting to see a miracle. Late in the day, Jesus said, "Let's go. Get away, get alone." The crowds followed them to the mountainside, where they ended up feeding this mass multitude. A mighty miracle happened, but still these men were dealing with a crowd of probably 15,000 people. And at the end of all that, evening is drawing near. Jesus says to them, "Go, get in the boat, go to the other side of the sea to Capernaum." And Jesus stays, dismisses the crowd, and then he goes up on the mountainside to pray and commune with the Father. And so this has been a long day already. Matthew and Mark tell us that Jesus commanded them to go in the boat and head to the other side. So they're rowing. The scripture tells us the wind and the waves are against them. It was stormy. So it's tough rowing a boat to start with, to go miles and miles, but they're really having a hard time. Matthew and Mark also tell us that in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus sees them still out in the middle of the lake, trying to row across, and then he starts walking on the waves towards them. Now, the fourth watch of the night in Jewish time at that time, that they broke up their evening from 6 p.m. to 9 was the first watch, 9 to 12 second, 12 to 3 third watch. Fourth watch was 3 to 6 in the morning. So go figure, they'd been rowing maybe 6 hours at least, maybe 8 hours rowing, and straining against the oars, worn out, emotionally spent. And here comes Jesus walking across the waves. Small thought to consider here is that it was Jesus, their Lord, who sent them into this mess. They didn't do anything wrong. They were doing the right stuff. They were serving, they were obeying, and they ended up in a mess of a storm and worn out, spent. And point I want to make here is just because we decide to serve and follow God does not mean that we're going to be spared from storms. In fact, he may purposely lead us into some rough waters, not because he's cruel or mean, but it's because in those rough waters that often we're going to learn our greatest lessons. Just as they had learned a great lesson with having to face a crowd that was bigger than their resources to deal with, that they had to depend on his resources. Now they're going to learn another lesson. We'll take a look at that tomorrow. God bless.